Hi, here's May and welcome to this simple body tutorial video. I'll show you how I construct bodies in a simplified way. This is in no way a very detailed, anatomically correct way to draw bodies, but it's how I like to draw them. And I think when you learn to draw bodies, it's good to look at how you can simplify them and also how different artists do this so you can find your own way. First, I'll show you how I would construct a basic body from a simple front-on perspective. What I like to do is start out with the head. Some artists like to start out with the torso, but the way I kind of always started out was just drawing the head. And you'll see I like to work with outlines and silhouettes rather than shapes, but when constructing bodies I also like to use shapes, since in your mind you should be able to visualize how the different parts of the body look like. For example, if you have arms, imagining them as cylinders and so on is very helpful. After drawing the head, I like to add the neck, and then for the shoulders I like to use these two circles. And for the front-on perspective it makes sense to have them be at the same distance from the neck. And when I have these shoulder circles, I like to do the upper body next. And for this I use shape, or rather a combination of two shapes. For once we have this one, and if I were to draw this in perspective, for the kind of the rib cage and the upper half of the upper body, I would use this shape, and then for the lower one a similar shape just flipped. You can see in perspective this would change like this shape. Since I now have the torso, I also like to use a center line, which should be straight. You could also just use the mirror tool when you draw a body like this, but I like to kind of challenge myself and to do it this way. And after I now have the upper body drawn, I like to carry on with the arms, and for this the elbow joints are usually around where the waistline is. As you can see, I like to just use lines for the arms for now and work with these circles. Then the lower arms are around as long as the upper arms. That's how I like to do it and how the human body usually works. This is where I would then place the hands later on. That's what I would draw next. Both the hip joints. Overall, this distance should be around as long as this distance, but of course this can all change with the way you stylize things. This is then my kind of guide for the legs and how long they should be. Oftentimes I like to make the legs a bit longer than the upper body. A good way to measure this, if you want to, is just to use some straight lines and then copy it and drag it down to see this line is longer than the lower one, so I would now change it up. Now let's look at if the length is around the same. Oftentimes I just look at it and can tell, but it's also good to from time to time measure this, especially if you're unsure. And when you're drawing more complex poses, measuring it in a way can really help. That's around the same size. Now that we have this basic construct, what I then like to do is I would maybe use a new layer since I'm drawing digitally, and then I would draw in the arms and the legs and so on with shapes. And for the upper arms as well as for the upper legs, I would just use this kind of cylindrical shape, but towards the knee or the elbow it gets thinner. And for the elbows and also the lower legs, what's kind of similar is this shape. It's just rounded like this. I would draw in the hands. Of course I would do this in more detail, but since this is not a hand tutorial, I don't want to spend a lot of time on drawing the hands and the simple waist. And of course this whole shape can change with the body type, and I also tell you some differences about drawing a basic male, female and androgynous body later on. Here you can see I again use this shape getting thinner towards the knee, and for the lower leg I then again use this kind of shape. Then we have simple feet. Since this is also not a feet tutorial, I'm gonna do it like this. You can see that's how I would construct a basic body. And most of the time the way I stylize things is I make the legs and maybe also the arms, because oftentimes when you make the legs longer it makes sense to also have the arms be longer. It just looks more appealing. And then if you want to, what I would do if I want to add some anatomical indications, but oftentimes this is not necessary since I just draw a t-shirt on the whole figure. What I like to do is have these kind of collarbone things, maybe these lines for the neck, and then the chest, of course, depends on what biological gender you draw. Yeah, I would indicate it like this, and then simple line here, maybe some lines here for the abs. That's a basic body. A small tip I have, if you draw this in any kind of perspective as well, what I also like to do is when I have these joints or something like that, I like to connect them with parallel lines. Then the torso would be like this and so on. This would be how I would then use some parallel lines just to make sure that the pose works. Of course, to do a pose like this, you kind of have to imagine how the perspective would work in your head, and this is in no way very accurate since I just drew this very quickly and it's very small. But now I move on to drawing 3 different body types, and I'll tell you what I would do to make them appear different. First, the male body type, I would make the upper body, the shoulders especially, wider and the waist smaller. You can see that overall the way I like to stylize things is I like to draw rather skinny people, and that's just my own preference. If you're looking to draw very muscular bodies, then I would advise looking at some anatomy tutorials or other artists. I will also include some other helpful body and anatomy videos in the video description, which help me a lot. In case you're interested in them, you can check them out. But then for the female body type, I would have the shoulders and also the waist be smaller, and then the hips wider. This is just how biologically the male and female bodies are different, but when drawing this is often emphasized even more. And then for the androgynous body type, which is the one I probably draw the most, I have the waist be slightly smaller than the shoulders and the hips, but the shoulders and the hips are maybe around the same size, but also the hips maybe a bit smaller than the upper body, since for most human bodies you will see that the shoulders are slightly wider than the hips, even with female body types. And yeah, of course, what also is different, I didn't even mention this, is that female bodies you would also draw in breasts, and I'd just like to first draw a simple chest and then add them later on. Some small tips to end this video with is that if you want to make your character appear more muscular, what I like to do, and as I said before, I like to draw bodies generally in a pretty simplified way, so I won't include very detailed anatomy, but the shoulders have this kind of bump, which makes the overall body appear more muscular. The way I myself learned a lot about anatomy and how muscles look is by being very interested in working out and sports. Through that I observed how the muscles work and a lot of bodies. You can also, it may be kind of weird, but you can look at workout videos. I, for example, often look at Pamela Reif and I see how the muscles contract and so on. And if you yourself do the workout and feel it, it can also really help with understanding how the muscles look and work. And as I also mentioned before, what can be very helpful as well is just to have a good understanding of perspective and some basic shapes, like using cylinders for the arms and legs and so on. And if you're unsure about something, you can also draw wraparounds around the legs, the upper body, and so on. You can imagine them as kind of belts that go around your waist, your legs, your arms, and so on. To quickly recap how I construct bodies is I first start out with the head, then I add the shoulder joints, afterwards the upper body with these 2 shapes on top of each other, and I also add the center line for the body, oftentimes to figure out where the whole center of the body would be, to make sure one side of the body isn't bigger than the other one. Afterwards I then add the elbow joints and then also the wrist joints, which have the same distance from each other. When I'm done with this, I then move on to the hips and the legs and add their joints. And I overall like to make sure the arms and upper legs are as long as the lower arms, lower legs, and that the upper body is around as long as the legs. But I like to stylize this a bit. Finally, when I have all the shapes in place, I then draw out the full upper arms, lower arms, and so on. That's how I would construct bodies in any perspective. I hope this video was helpful to you, and if you have any questions you can leave them in the comments. Thank you for watching the video and have a great day. Goodbye.